Okay, so this one is a subject that I have wanted to talk about for some time now, um, because I think it relates to the world that we live in, and perhaps other people out there can relate to this. By the way, if you're wondering about the angle I'm on, a swivel chair, so I'll try and keep still. But yeah, there isn't a day goes by when there isn't some news item or issue that I feel strongly about. I'm a political animal. It's in my blood. I have strong views on a lot of issues. I'm opinionated. I can maybe be stubborn at times, and I believe in standing up for my conviction. So I think this is a very useful platform for me to vocalize my thoughts on things that I think need to be raised. And ultimately, it is just my opinions. Um, People can take it or leave it. I always welcome the support, obviously, and I'm grateful for that. But I would never want an echo chamber. I wouldn't expect everyone to agree with me. Um, But sometimes, particularly in this age of the internet where so much information comes online, it can actually be sensory overload. I think this is particularly true of social media, where you could just be bombarded with information. Sometimes I see people, see profiles that is on Facebook, and they're in very few groups. They're very inactive. They might have a profile, but they're very inactive. And I understand that. I understand why some people would want that sort of situation. Um, but for me, it's very hard to walk away from activism and from debate forums insofar as like a long term thing. I could certainly break myself away for a while, and I actually think that's extremely important. But long term, it will all. I cannot live as a passive person. I just can't do it because even if I wanted to, my thoughts on these things would dictate otherwise, because my spirit and my soul would be pushing me to speak out. Um, but I do think sometimes it's very important to have downtime, because if you spend all your time thinking about things like geopolitical tensions, war, genocide, human rights abuses, all the BS that comes from the culture wars, it can be profoundly depressing and it can wear you down. As an observer, as someone who raises opinions, as a participant in the debate, it can weigh you down. Now, certain people have to do it because it's a job. Politicians, by the nature of their job, they have to debate things. But even politicians, I would imagine most of them have downtime. Um, I imagine when Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer have time off, they don't want to talk politics. I'm sure they've got their whatever things they're interested in. I think Boris Johnson likes to make model trains, and don't know what Starmer's hobbies are, but I think that would be a totally human and understandable thing. And I actually think for a leader, it's healthy, because if they were robotic and constantly working, then naturally, at some point, their focus and their concentration is going to be off. So I think it's essential. I mean, Margaret Thatcher famously slept on something like 4 hours, but she still needed her 4 hours. Um, and David Cameron and other leaders often spoke about sort of days that they would have. So there's a lot of allegations that could be thrown at politicians, but I don't think lazy is one. I really think that is it's just not fair. I think you could get incompetent MPs. I think you could get MPs on the completely wrong side of a debate or enacting pushing bad policy. I don't think there's many MPs that are genuinely lazy. There might be some that take their voters for granted, but I honestly think that most do work hard. I'm just using that as one example. Journalists, editors are very hardworking, and this is something that I need to be aware of because I myself will be a freelance journalist. That's a bit different from being a staff journalist, and I think gives me more freedom and flexibility. But if I want to get paid, I still need to put the work in. So with that sort of job, again, my work as a freelance journalist, I can pick to an extent the sort of stories that I want to cover, that I want to look at. But there will be times I might have an assignment that I find a bit tedious or boring, and I'll have to just do it. So it is so, so important for people to have downtime. Athletes, business people, politicians, any of these sort of professions are demanding. And then, of course, I haven't even mentioned the most demanding of all right now, which is medical staff. When people have done a 12-hour shift or they have come out of COVID wards, I bet that the last thing on earth they would want to do is turn on the news and see the latest developments on COVID. I'm sure they want to go home and have a long bath and distract themselves. So, whilst I have a real interest in these things, it's not just that I feel motivated by them. I'm interested in them. I'm interested in the way the world is. Sometimes even I need to just step back and just distract myself with something trivial, something entertaining. For example, recently I've been watching Merlin, the TV series about well, they have a very slightly different take on it. They have the whole Camelot medieval setting. It was pretty popular in Britain. Series starring Colin Morgan, launched in 2008, and it's now once again streaming on Netflix. But I've been watching that because it's when I'm looking at that, I'm not thinking about human rights abuses in China. I'm not thinking about the nauseating left-right battles and the culture wars. Those things are something that I will always go back to. I can never get them out of my system. I can never ignore them. But I do think it's healthy and very important at times to just walk away. And finally, when it comes to debate, I think there's a lot of ego involved. People have this thing about, I really detest this new phenomenon we see in journalism. And it's both the left and, excuse me, it's both the left and the right that do this. They'll have headlines like so and so destroyed so and so's argument, or person A um, shut down person B. It's really, to me, it's dumbing down. And even, supposedly quality newspapers like the Eye are doing this. It's infantile. It's dumbing down because it's like a popularity contest rather than a serious discussion and debate about serious issues. That's why I'm not a big fan of memes, although I admit that some memes are witty and intelligent. For the most part, I think they're partisan and petty for the most part. They have their place, but as soon as someone sticks a meme into a conversation or a debate thread, that's them saying, "Oh, I don't really want to talk about the issues. I just want to score cheap political points and, troll people." That's what it is. That's why I'm not a huge fan of them. Maybe I'm boring, maybe it's a way of lightening up political discourse, but I just find them a bit petty. Um, so yeah, I just think it's extremely important to that people give themselves a break. I mean, I've mentioned a lot of pressurizing jobs. One thing I haven't mentioned, which I think is very important, is human rights activists, people who are really, they dedicate their lives to helping others. They dedicate their lives to fighting injustice. Now, they must have downtime because if they didn't, I think they must be clinically depressed. I think it must. I mean, I think it takes a very strong spirit to. We often talk about human rights abuses and people who are treated unfairly, but actually, the defenders. There are very real mental health impacts there. Someone who is, for example, involved in Amnesty International or another human rights group, and they're tasked with confronting the Chinese regime. It's a very, very hard thing. I mean, I have profound respect for them, but they must have times where it just gets too depressing. How about missionaries or aid workers who were on the ground during the Rwanda genocide? I think a lot of those people must have had PTSD afterwards. I know the Canadian General Romeo Dallaire Um, he was one of the UN generals involved, and it affected him deeply. He became an alcoholic. It really got to him, guilt and just seeing the atrocities that he had seen. And actually, with journalism, there's always this mantra about journalists being neutral. But let's say a journalist witnesses an atrocity by a brutal regime or by a terrorist group. How can they psychologically not be moved by that? So expecting journalists to be absolutely on the fence and 100% neutral in every case, I think, is unrealistic and unfair. Journalists are human beings; they have emotions. They'd be pretty robotic if they weren't moved by something. But I remember Ross Kemp, who in Britain is well known as a TV soap actor, but he's also established himself as a leading journalist, and he's been in some of the most dangerous places in the world. I have huge respect for the guy. I mean, he's incredibly brave. But I remember he was interviewing this gang leader. Can't remember which country it was, but the guy had raped numerous women and he had child soldiers, and he was a really nasty piece of work. And Kemp just had to sit there and ask some questions. Now, you could tell that Kemp was trying to keep his emotions reined in. That takes enormous willpower. Of course, the guy had his security people anyway, so it's not like Ross Kemp, who's a pretty, robust guy. He's well built and he can certainly handle himself, I imagine. His whole image in EastEnders was a tough guy, but for him to see that that takes real courage and toughness, I think, to have to be professional and hold it in, because a lot of people would come across someone like that and they would want to lash out. I would, So I think for a journalist, you really, really need to try and divorce yourself from the emotions of it, but that's very hard. The film Welcome to Sarajevo, it's about a group of British journalists in the Bosnian War. It's a very good film for me because it gave some insight into what that might have been like. Obviously, they were just actors. They can't really know, but I think it was a fairly good description. I've read a lot of books by journalists, reading journalists like Katie Eddy, Martin Bell, John Simpson, and they've been in those sort of situations. And I think Welcome to Sarajevo is a fairly good portrayal of that. Anyway, I'll leave it there. It is so, so, so important to look out for our own mental health. And whilst I will never shut up about these things, I will give myself downtime because if I don't, I know that I would just get severely depressed and, feeling that it's a David and Goliath situation or feeling like nothing's changing. So I have to distract myself. Um, and I recommend everyone does. There's some people that really are selfish and they genuinely don't care about anyone but themselves. But most people have a conscience to some extent. Even if they're not that political and they're not that moved by things, you can guarantee there'll be at least one issue that they feel strongly about. So with that, they can't obsess about it. I talk a lot about issues like human rights, China, Islamism, and I stand by every word. But by the same token, I have to distract myself sometimes. Right. So just something to think about. Thanks for watching.